Hi, guys. Welcome back to your living room or your kitchen or your house, your coronavirus prison. You know what I miss about the classroom most of all? I miss your teenage rebelliousness. You're pushing back. You're wanting to do things your own way. You're wanting to do your own thing. You know, you're divergent thinkers. I know that sounds like an insult, but really what it means is you want to put together a world view, a view of the world that's all your own. You want to construct knowledge and not just take it unquestioningly from an authority figure. It reminds me of someone I used to know. Now, being 14 and arguing, say, with your teachers or your parents really means just one thing. You want to think for yourselves. And so, in your honor, I found a video for you. Wait for it.
I just want to highlight a few things. I'm worried really about how much fuzzy thinking is going on in the world. Fuzzy thinking, people just not thinking straight. What we're not valuing is knowledge as process rather than knowledge as an answer. If you're an employer and two candidates come up looking for a job, and you're interviewing the two candidates, and you say, oh, as for part of this interview, I just want to ask you, what's the height of the spire on this building that we're in? And the candidate says, oh, I was an architect. I've majored in architecture for a while, and I memorized the heights of all the buildings on campus. I know the height of that spire is 150 feet. In fact, 155 feet tall. Okay, turns out that's the right answer. That's the right answer. And the person came up with it in seconds. That person goes away, the next candidate walks in. Do you know the height of the spire on this building? The candidate says, no, but I'll be right back. Person runs outside, measures the length of the shadow of that spire on the ground, measures the length of his or her own shadow, ratios the height to the shadows, comes up with a number. Runs back inside, it's about 150 feet. Who are you going to hire? I'm hiring the person who figured it out, even though it took that person longer, even though the person's answer is not as precise. I'm hiring that person because that person knows how to use the mind in a way not previously engaged. You realize when you know how to think, it empowers you far beyond those who know only what to think.
Wow. When you know how to think, it empowers you far beyond those who know only what to think. Neil deGrasse Tyson is really talking about you, divergent thinkers. He's talking about taking perceptions, beliefs, and evidence and coming up with your own solution to problems. Look, if you're not constructing your own knowledge, you're not really learning. And guys and girls, one of the things that I've been thinking about, struggling with imperfectly, is about race in America. Now, to me, race in America is not about saying and coming to the conclusion that we're all the same on the inside, people are people, and all lives matter. And no, to me, it's about power, how power is used in America, who embodies power, and how we could change the system. I'm thinking a lot about Black Lives Matter and police violence and mass incarceration of Black men. As a teacher, I'm thinking about my Black and white students. I'm thinking about the opportunity gap and white privilege and what awaits my students after they leave school. So I'm wondering about MLK, nonviolence, racism today, and how do the two movements connect. If MLK wasn't assassinated, Would his tactics of nonviolence have relevance today? That's my big question from last week. And so last week, after reading some sources and analyzing evidence, I came up with a theory. No, King's method of nonviolence was important in drawing attention to injustice at the start of the civil rights movement, but it wouldn't have been enough to create change around racial injustice in the long run because white supremacy is so deeply rooted in the power structure of America. So that was my thinking last week with some of the reading that I've done. And my work is to combine ideas across multiple texts to come up with a nuanced theory. So I want to share a video that I read. Yeah, you can read videos. That it's changed my thinking a little bit. So let me share this with you. But wait for it. Go ahead.
I would rather die on the highways of Alabama than make a butchery of my conscience. That's right.
Question. If you were around during the civil rights movement, would you have supported Martin Luther King Jr., our most celebrated leader of the time? The answer probably seems obvious, but there's a really good chance that you wouldn't have approved of him. And that's because our commonly held ideas about Dr. King are watered down, overly romanticized, and often flat out wrong.
I have a dream. One day.
We often think that most good people loved Martin Luther King when he was alive, and sadly, that wasn't the case. Right? Many, many people certainly admired him, but the vast majority of Americans were not. One of the things that we've also missed is the ways that Dr. King is talking about police brutality when he's alive.
Something must be done to end this kind of unnecessary abuse of police power and what we see as outright police brutality.
We've often heard critics of Black Lives Matter say if Dr. King were alive today, he'd be ashamed.
But all lives matter. It's not that any life matters more than another. That's the whole message I think that Dr. King tried to present.
Mike Huckabee instructs the protesters in Ferguson to be more like Martin Luther King. I thought to myself, be careful what you wish for. Because in many ways, the Ferguson protesters were a lot like Martin Luther King. Dr. King very much understood the importance and need for sort of the disrupting of unjust conditions. He was arrested 30 times over the course of his life.
We're the home of Dr. Martin Luther King. And the only thing that I ask is that they not take the freeways. Dr. King would never take a freeway. Dr. King would never take a freeway.
It was just astonishing. The Selma to Montgomery March, that's on a highway. Certainly Dr. King saw segregation in the South as a problem, but he also saw segregation in the North as a problem.
The many problems that exist here and in all of our urban and rural communities for that matter.
In the letter from Birmingham jail in 1963, he's talking about the greatest threat may not be the Klan, but the white moderate who prefers order to justice.
Glaring example.
The fear and resistance to Dr. King ran deep, well into the offices of elected leaders and the FBI.
They're bugging and wiretapping his home, his office, his hotel rooms. They see him as potentially dangerous, potentially a communist or a communist sympathizer.
What is your reaction to the charges made by J. Edgar Hoover? He called you the most notorious liar in the country, and this is a direct quote.
Yes, this is what I understand.
So if in fact Dr. King was angry, criticized white moderates and liberals, advocated for criminal justice reform, and believed in civil disobedience, why is it that we have this overly warm and fuzzy idea of him? And what purpose does that narrative serve?
Honoring Dr. King and the civil rights movement is used to make us feel good about ourselves as a country. We had a problem, they shone a light on this injustice, and we corrected it. Even when President Trump goes to meet the Pope, takes him first edition writings of Dr. King.
So I wonder, how will history remember people like Colin Kaepernick and the activists of Black Lives Matter?
I couldn't see another hashtag Sandra Bland, hashtag Tamir Rice.
I think we will see a Colin Kaepernick Boulevard, similar with Black Lives Matter. I mean, Black Lives Matter has fundamentally changed the national conversation we're having. So there's no question to me, in 20 years, we're going to look back on this as necessary, as essential, as important, as right.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed that brief history, here's another one about workplace sexual harassment trainings and how they've evolved over time.
Wow. I'm saying wow because I think that maybe I'm going to have to revise my theory.
I would rather die on the highways of Alabama than make a butchery of my conscience. That's right.
Oops.
Question.
Hold on.
If you were around
Great. Sorry about that. A little technical difficulty, but moving on. After watching that video, I feel like I have to revise my theory. I'm learning that MLK was a lot more radical than he's been portrayed. The government didn't trust him, and white Americans were often suspicious of him. His movement wasn't that peaceful. He disrupted cities, highways, and businesses. They just didn't use violence. And he thought that the white moderate was even more dangerous than the KKK. So I've learned that some of my assumptions, guys and girls, about nonviolence were not 100% correct. And I'm bringing growth mindset to my research here. In his own day, King wasn't loved by everybody. His I Have a Dream speech was just one moment in a very turbulent time. And all that ambivalence does not quite equal how venerated and honored he seems to be today. So, what do I do with this information? Well, new evidence does not have to sink me. It doesn't mean I have to just totally rewrite the book. I don't have to throw it away. Um, but new evidence can do one to three things. It can add to your theory by deepening your understanding, adding layers. It can modify your theory by providing a new direction, or it could contradict your theory and have you question how you really need to change your thinking. But with new evidence, then, with my new goal today will be to revise my theory in light of this new text. And then with that revised theory, craft a really engaging introduction. And here's why. By practicing these skills, I can aim for a really nuanced essay, not 5-paragraph essay. A nuanced essay which includes multiple perspectives and which is presented in a way that will engage readers. And with your revised theory, guess what you're going to do? You're going to write an introduction. Great. So here's how I did mine. Here's my first theory from last week. And then after watching the video, I really have to tweak it. Because King's method of nonviolence was a highly adaptive tool that was meant to disrupt business as usual, it had the potential to evolve to our current need to shed light on white privilege, which is at the heart of America's power structure. This new evidence really helped me with my essential question because I can see a clearer connection between King's turbulent era and our own. Now, I'm going to write an introduction. I think I got it. I suppose that's it. I've got a claim, a couple of reasons. Voila, I have a sufficient intro to get started on my essay. Or do I? Is this really an adequate introduction? Well, let's take a look at what a real introduction looks like. Wait for it. This is from Scholastic magazine, and I want to bring your attention to the introduction, which begins here on August 28, 1963. More than 250,000 people gathered at the National Mall in Washington. So it starts back in history. It gives you a historical moment back in time. It brings us to the I Have a Dream speech using actual quotes from the speech and the underlying principles or beliefs of that speech. And then the problems that speech was meant to address, namely, it was a call for racial equality for African Americans at the time who couldn't eat at certain restaurants, still had to attend segregated schools, and were unemployed at nearly twice the rate of that of whites. And the effect of this speech was to help secure passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So we're creating some background information here. Now, this landmark legislation was one of many key milestones that King was involved in. And just as King was about to pivot to f- address new social justice issues, he was assassinated. And then now, as we prepare 50 years later to examine King's legacy, we start to realize that the same problems are with us. So this article started with some historical information, moved on to key principles, use IAD to construct the narrative, said what the effect of some of the work was, and brought the information to present time, and then stated the thesis at the end of the introduction. So this gives me some things to think about in terms of how I want to write an introduction. I think I need strong background information, information that acts like a hook and draws you in, background information which orients you, the reader, to the topic and gives you, the reader, the necessary knowledge to move forward into the text. So what I noticed by looking at this introduction only is that it consisted almost entirely of background info, and it had some of or all of these elements. It started with an historic moment and included a real life situation. It introduced key vocabulary and concepts. It illustrated the problems or issues. It suggested the complexity of the topic of racism at the time. It oriented you to the topic currently, what are racial issues now? And it also included some IAD so that the narrative wouldn't be dry and boring. Your job this week, here we got it, we built up to this, is to continue researching your topic. You are interested in your topic. Don't just stop at 3 sources. If you haven't got a really strong feeling for your essential question, keep going. Revise your theory in light of new evidence. Then craft an introduction that begins with background info, and builds to your thesis. I have an idea. Don't put your thesis first. Don't put your thesis in the middle. For this week, put your thesis at the end, construct background information that builds to the thesis, and that'll be your introduction. Include at least 4 elements of background info, and these are the elements. We'll leave it at this page for now for you to look at. Include at least 4 of these in your introduction, concluding the introduction with your thesis. I'm going to post this video on Schoology, so you should review it for enhanced comprehension. I'll also include these elements for background information on the assignment itself. Now, what questions do you have? Let's just post our questions in the chat box and talk about them. Thanks a lot.